Welcome to Dynasty Life. I'm Theo Gremminger. Redraft ends, but Dynasty is life. And for a lot of you, your redraft seems like it really literally ended with all the injuries. So we're gonna keep grinding. For Dynasty managers, it's funny. They tell us to have the long view, but the injuries absolutely destroy you as a Dynasty manager as well. I'm really excited today to be joined by Heath Cummings. Heath was one of my first guests ever on Dynasty Life, and he keeps coming back over here. Heath, you can find him over at CBS on Fantasy Football Today, Dynasty. Heath, you do so much for the Dynasty community. You definitely have one of the more high-profile Dynasty shows out there, really amplify Dynasty overall with the CBS presence. And you're a great guy to talk shop with. I think you're able to kind of stay calm and not get too reactionary, but you had to react pretty harshly last week when you lost a bunch of guys from your rosters.
You know, it is funny because you're right. We preach patience, patience, patience. We're worried about talent, not situation. Like these guys will all eventually pay off. And then you have 4 or 5 injuries. And like we just all start running around with chickens with our heads cut off. I appreciate all of the kind words. The nice thing is like there's no good thing about injuries, but all of these injuries really give dynasty managers a chance to take advantage of action. There are things happening in dynasty leagues on the waiver wire, in trades. And if you're really sharp and you really know what's going on, anytime there's a lot of action, you've got a chance for profit.
I actually love that. And it's sort of the whole adage that when one door closes, another opens. If you're one of these fantasy managers who didn't suffer a significant injury, then all of a sudden your outlook for the season looks a little bit differently. You have an opportunity to push it and get a really strong start during this beginning of the season. And a lot of times in Dynasty, this is where you talk about patience and we're concerned about talent. This is really why you want to stack your roster with talent, because you really don't know when that player who's an exceptional talent that maybe before the season you think this guy might be a wide receiver 2, takes his game to the next level, the next stratosphere. It becomes a wide receiver 1. We see it at the running back position. We see it at the tight end position. So I think, what this has also created, Heath, is there's sort of a dynasty phenomenon. And I don't know if you agree with this, but it's sort of like a anecdotal for me. But when somebody's rostering an old, important player, they tend to have a roster that has a bunch of old, important players.
Yes.
Because they're not churning that roster the same way other people are. They're not as concerned about getting younger because they have a championship window that's propelled by a guy like a Christian McCaffrey, a Tyreek Hill, where I already have pushed the chips in. Why not push the chips in some more?
Yep.
I have a Christian McCaffrey team that has Cooper Kupp and Tyreek Hill. And I felt really, really good when I'm drafting out in Vegas and we're drafting and all of these guys are going in like the top 15 and have 2 top 5 picks. I'm like, this is my year. Now I'm sitting here thinking, do I start the rebuild process right now and trade away Tyreek Hill? Because I'm already holding these other 2 guys on the IR spot. And I think a lot of managers are in my spot. Are you seeing that as well? Do you agree with that?
Oh, yeah. I've got a Cooper Kupp and Travis Kelce team. And the guys I was really worried about was James Conner and Aaron Jones. And it turns out that James Conner and Aaron Jones are my 2 best players. And Cooper Kupp and Travis Kelce are terrible or hurt. So, yes, I think that's kind of the way, in my opinion, it should work. Like you said, if you get into that spot to where you've been a contender for 3 or 4 years and do I tear it down or do I keep pushing? If you're going to keep pushing, then you should be accumulating players like that. And it might lead to a 2-year rebuild or a 2.5-year rebuild. That's okay if I can chase down one more title.
Yeah, and you nailed it. I think a lot of people get away from the idea of Dynasty, just like redraft, just like best ball, is to win. It's not to have this continual like sexy roster where I have a bunch of draft picks and a bunch of young guys who might become good. It's to win.
Right.
So once in a while when you have these rosters, you run into these injury problems. So pushing back on this, you have an Aaron Jones and a James Conner on a roster with a Travis Kelce, who's a diminishing asset, and Cooper Kupp, who maybe he's back week 7. Are you looking to trade away those 2 guys?
I think where I'm at is if somebody, it's too early in the year, I think probably. Yeah. Because if somebody would make me a legitimate offer for James Conner, then yeah, I'd probably go ahead and do that. Aaron Jones is going to get me a second if I'm really lucky. Probably not going to do that. But I think most of the teams that are like, am I contending? Am I not? Are not buying James Conner in September. They want to see what those draft picks are going to get them closer to the deadline. And they're not going to buy a guy they think might be healthy when they get there.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I do think that there are certain managers who are not going to say it's too early in the season. And I think you want to kick the tires on some of these guys like James Conner, kick the tires on even like an Alvin Kamara. Anybody who's older, if the roster doesn't support it, the balance of the roster doesn't support it, it's worth at least kicking the tires. I think a great way to start out the conversation is I'll shoot a second round pick, maybe plus, to the Alvin Kamara manager. And most of the time, you're not going to get like a cursed out or an instant reject. You might get a comment, hey, I'm not ready to move him, or you're going to need a lot more than that. If somebody comments or counters, you know they're open to trading that player. If you get the instant reject, maybe not so much. But I wanted to kind of pick your brain on this. The Saints are the talk of fantasy football. I'm sure on every single podcast you've been on this week, at some point you've talked about Clint Kubiak and how positive this offense is. Want to know, besides the Saints, what is a player or a team, something that's been a really big positive surprise for you through 2 weeks of NFL football, Heath?
I'm glad you said a player or a team, because there is a team with a couple of players that have been a big positive surprise and a couple that have been a major disappointment. But I will say the Chargers, because I don't think there is a better story in fantasy football, especially from a dynasty fantasy perspective, than J.K. Dobbins returning to being J.K. Dobbins again. Because those of us who have been playing dynasty for a long time remember when J.K. Dobbins was a generational running back prospect and going to be the most efficient rusher in the NFL, and then the most efficient rusher in the NFL, except he can't stay healthy, and major leg injury. And now he's averaging, 10 yards per carry in his first 2 games for the Chargers and looks absolutely awesome. He's in that Greg Roman system. It's a really tough thing now, because I think you look at his injury history and you think, well, now am I supposed to trade J.K. Dobbins? But it just feels too good to do that. And then the other one is Quentin Johnston, a guy who was just beaten up so badly his first year in the NFL. And I think really misused his first year in the NFL. And week 1 didn't look that great, but now we're 2 weeks into the season, and he leads the Chargers in target share and air yards and fantasy points. And he just scored 2 touchdowns, and he has Justin Herbert. And so there's reason for hope with Quentin Johnston, and we're getting to see J.K. Dobbins be J.K. Dobbins again. I didn't know if we'd ever get to see that again.
I love it. I love that you go there. J.K. Dobbins is mind-blowing right now, how the athleticism appears to be back. And it's sort of he has the right coaching staff for this. There's nothing more than a Harbaugh Roman-led team would like than having this guy with a huge chip on his shoulder, overcoming adversity, running behind their offensive line, and challenging for the rushing title. You just can't make this thing up. It's almost like a movie. And I had this conversation with Scott Barrett like 2 weeks ago, where every single person's telling you to trade J.K. Dobbins. That's probably like if you were a computer and you ran your team like it was a Fortune 500 company, then this would absolutely be the time to trade him. But I actually did the opposite. I traded for him. The reason I did so is because I don't have him in my portfolio. I'd cleared out my Dobbins shares, and now I feel like I'm going to miss out. I have a team that's was like a quasi contender that's 2-0, and I'm getting great production out of James Cook and Malik Nabers and a few other guys. And I said, I'm going to push the chips in a little bit. I traded Kendre Miller and a 2025 second in a single QB league to go get some J.K. Dobbins. I'm going to see where this road takes me. I'm not going to go all in, but I'm going to have him on maybe 1 or 2 more teams if the situation prevents himself.
I think if I can acquire Dobbins for a second, or maybe even a second, like I saw just a second ago, because Jacob Gibbs and I had the same conversation on Tuesday, and Gibbs is like, I don't think I'm giving up a second for Dobbins. And so I get that. But somebody responded and said, I just traded him for a second, and I would call him, I guess now rookie Kendre Miller, Marshawn Lloyd, back on the injured reserve. And so that was the deal that went down there. And I think if I can get it done for a second or a second slightly plus, I like it. I have him on one team, and I think I traded a 4th for him, like right after the injury. His manager said, first person to give me a 4th for J.K. Dobbins gets him. It was just crestfallen. And I did it. And so now, yeah, I can turn that fourth into a second. The computer tells me I should. There's no way I'm trading him for a second.
Yeah.
No.
I mean, the guy flipping into the end zone on another long touchdown run at least bought him 6 more weeks on your roster, Heath. It's like the joy that you're getting out of having him and seeing him succeed, especially paying the 4th rounder for him. It absolutely feels like stealing when you get that sort of a value out of a player. We're going to talk about what to do with Puka Nacua. We're also going to talk about our updated Dynasty rankings. We'll be right back.
Now, I know many of you are looking for a secret weapon for your Dynasty League, and I have it. It's called the Dynasty Dominator app. You go to the App Store, go to Google Play. It's right there. It's $5 to download, and then every year it's $5 to load the next incoming class of rookies. You can add Superflex, add tight end premium. It's incredible because it allows you to look up players. It allows you to vote on whether a player is a buy, hold, or sell, and then see the market sentiment on that player. And you can compare their lifetime value rating from Player Profiler to their Dynasty ADP at the FFPC, all in the price lookup tool. And beyond that, we have a trade analyzer, so you'll never lose another Dynasty trade again. And in our settings, you can set this is a win now team, this is a rebuilding team, and then we let you compare players. Look at their metrics side by side, prospect metrics, NFL metrics. It's all there. It's $5 in the App Store. There's some add-ons for Superflex and to buy the upcoming rookie class. Every year, you're going to spend $5 on this thing, and it's going to be well worth it.
Welcome back to Dynasty Life. Theo Gremminger with Heath Cummings. Heath, before we talk about Puka Nacua, I want to pick your brain on, you talked about James Conner, you talked about Aaron Jones. Who are some older players that you're looking to kick the tires on early in the season where they could be somewhat of like a dynasty mercenary, a guy who you're going to be able to put in your lineup right away, bank the points this year, where you really don't care what they do for you in 2025. It's more of a short-term asset type player. Do any players sort of jump out to you right now on guys that people should be trying to trade for?
Well, I think if you're in a super flex league, then you push the button on Derek Carr really quick. There's a chance that somebody thinks they just had found money and wait, I can get a late first for Derek Carr in a super flex league. I thought I was never going to get anything for him again. You said Kamara. It's not going to be all Saints, but definitely a couple of Saints at the top. If I'm a true contender, I'm seeing what I can do for Tyreek Hill right now because my expectation right now is that Tua is probably going to come back at some point in the middle of the season, and Tyreek's probably going to be like a league-winning wide receiver in the fantasy playoffs, and he is over 30, and I wouldn't be surprised after a week or two of seeing him with Skylar Thompson, that price drops a little bit, especially with the uncertainty around him. And then, man, could this season have started any better for George Kittle? That guy might be the tight end one just for the 2024 season.
I love the George Kittle call. And that's the Deebo Samuel's going to miss some time now. How can they not pepper George Kittle with targets? Brandon Ayuk looks very slow out the gate. And Jordan Mason, this is like a little, if I have Jordan Mason on my rosters, it's been an amazing 2-week run, but I'm going to look to add Isaac Warrendo kind of wherever possible because Heath, you've been doing this a while. You've seen these guys get these 2-week sample sizes, maybe 3-week sample sizes, 4 weeks, and then sometimes it teeters off. It's hard to absorb this sort of volume week in, week out in the NFL. Right. So George Kittle, though, I love that call. That was tremendous. And I love the Derek Carr call. I think that there's a lot of people where I had Derek Carr as the number 2 ad in my waiver wire column this week. And it's sort of like a lot of people just expect this to end, but he's got solid line play, incredible scheme, 2 really good wide receivers, and Alvin Kamara. It reminds me a little bit about like Geno Smith 2 years ago, where Geno Smith, we expected it to tail off. End of the year, the guy's a QB1, he's QB6. Right. Derek Carr, you're not going to have to pay anywhere near that kind of price because it's sort of like it's comical almost for some of these managers if they could bank a big return on a guy that they weren't even happy to roster 3 weeks ago. So I love the Derek Carr call. Kamara is interesting though, because Kamara is 29, but he's still going to cost you something. I still think it's worth kicking the tires on, but I got to talk to you about Puka Nacua. I wouldn't say it's the last time because we podcasted so many times, but we podcasted together sort of during the rise of Puka Nacua We were both incredibly bullish, talking about historical win rates and how what he's doing is unprecedented. And he went on to finish as a top 6 wide receiver. Not only that, he set the NFL record for most receiving yardage by a rookie wide receiver in the NFL playoffs. I mean, unbelievable stuff. This year starts out where Cooper Kupp was seeing the majority of the targets early on. Then Puka Nacua gets hurt. So the guy's been banged up. It seems like there's a little bit of not necessarily lying, but we're not getting kind of the full scope anytime we get sort of, injury news with him. How are you handling him in Dynasty? There's some people are talking about trading him. Some people are saying this is actually a buy now window. I think it's a very confusing time. How are you handling Puka Nacua?
I think that the thing is, I mean, it's kind of similar to the Dobbins thing. The emotions that are attached to being right about Puka Nacua and having him on your roster, I don't think that those people, that, and including myself, are going to let him go for a reasonable cost because of this injury. And so, like, if I have him on my team, I'm not selling for any kind of discount. It's a hold. It should be a buy opportunity, but I'm not seeing the price really drop because, again, if you were the guy that was right on the wide receiver that was never supposed to be that good as a rookie, and then he just turns out to be the best rookie wide receiver ever, I'm not sure you sell for a discount at this point.
So for me, I sold a Puka share in a competitive Superflex FFPC league. I traded Puka and I gave up a third on top to get Nico Collins, which I thought was like, I'm going to get wide receiver 1 production this year. The age difference is not, it's close enough age-wise. Obviously, Nico's a little bit older, but I'm attached to a very good quarterback. But my thinking with Puka is it's really team dependent because a lot of the teams with Puka Nacua, where he was selected in rookie drafts, you really have no idea whether it's going to be a contending roster or sort of a not quite ready roster. Contending Puka Nacua rosters, though, I am looking to kind of pivot around and move him. Obviously, you're gonna be selling at a slight discount because you're not getting in the weeks. If you were going to go and trade Puka Nacua, who would be some wide receivers you would consider moving him for?
So, like you said, Nico, and those two are back-to-back in my most recent Dynasty wide receiver rankings. And so if you're a contender, I always tell people, like, you can't make rankings that fit for rebuilders and for contenders. If you're a contender, Nico's obviously got a little bit of an edge on him. I think that's a good fit. Another guy, one of my biggest risers from the last couple of months, Rashee Rice.
Love that.
I think that he, especially with the Pacheco injury, and I'm not sure the Chiefs are going to run the ball effectively, more short area targets in that offense, likely for Rice and for Travis Kelce. So he would be probably the second guy. And again, you're not losing 1 year in terms of the age. And then if you wanted to make a deal and get something in addition, maybe improve a different position, I'd say Zay Flowers. Shocked by his usage to start the season. Like, the story of week 1 was Isaiah Likely is getting all this work. Well, Zay Flowers has dominated targets 2 weeks in a row now. And I think most people see a pretty big gap in the dynasty value between Puka and Zay. So you might be able to trade Puka for Zay, get that production this year, and then also improve another position as a contender.
You know, it's a great name, the Zay Flowers one, where I talked about him in the preseason as a guy that I'm targeting, as a guy that I think is underrated by the market. And then, like it always goes, I don't end up with nearly enough of him despite being bullish on him. It's just sort of like the way it goes if you're doing fantasy content. But Zay Flowers, that's a tremendous name for you to bring up. 100 catch potential, seems to have already passed by in terms of expected usage each week versus the tight ends. Be very tilting to see which way this Dallas Cowboys week goes, where they lose to the Raiders. Maybe they go back to using Isaiah Likely a little bit more in week 2 versus Andrews. That whole tight end situation in Baltimore is weird right now. But Zay Flowers, I love that you bring that one up. I think that's the sort of pivot that you can make for Puka. Generally with Puka, I think that if you want to trade him, make sure you're getting high-end production. You don't want to kind of like trading a Puka to get a guy like that I really like Brian Thomas, doesn't really help you, because when Puka comes back from injury, he's probably going to be outscoring Brian Thomas. You need to have an edge making this trade. It needs to be something that helps you win immediately, but doesn't mess you up long term. So, I think it's a confusing time. You brought up Derek Carr as a trade candidate for a Tua team. Just curious, off of show sheet, is there any particular handcuff running backs? We've already seen the success with like a Jordan Mason. Zach Charbonnet, usage-wise, last week was promising. Are there any handcuff running backs where you're looking to kind of kick the tires on and acquire some of those guys? Oftentimes, that can be a way to really bolster your dynasty roster. Sometimes get those guys as a throw-in. Sometimes go get them for a random trade. Anybody kind of standing out to you, Heath?
I would still say most of the rookies that I was kind of excited about acquiring, maybe for a round 2 pick in rookie drafts and kind of expected to be handcuffs at the beginning of the year. And there's something that weird that happens is like these guys get drafted and then they just don't really play very much the first couple of weeks and people act like something has changed. When they were drafted, we really didn't think they were going to play very much the first couple of weeks. So Trey Sermon is playing now. I still think like he's at the top of the list because of James Conner's age, because of James Conner's injury history. Jalen Wright might be a good one because he got an opportunity and it didn't really look that special. I still think in the second half of the season, if he gets another opportunity, things are going to look different. Blake Corum hasn't been a part of things at all. Braylon Allen, Bucky Irving, Tank Bigsby, not a rookie, just suffered an injury, but still looked so much better in week 1 that's a guy I'd like to have for the second half.
Love the Bigsby call. I think that was actually a very tilting one with ETN's usage in week 1. ETN and Rashad White, two of the players that week 1, you're like a huge wake-up call if you have those guys on your dynasty roster. But I love that you brought up Trey Benson. You talked about James Conner earlier in the show. James Conner is playing fantastic. James Conner giving you like 19 points a game in PPR. But Trey Benson, nothing really changed.
Right.
There was the whole idea that they were going to he was going to cut into James Conner. I think really the argument for Benson is the contingent upside he has when Conner misses. And Conner's going to miss. He never plays a full season. Plus, you factor in the fact that he's 29 years old. And I like the fact that you're still on Jalen Wright. That was one where I think people really, really wanted a lot out of him with Raheem Mostert out. It doesn't always work that way. I think you nailed it. Like if we look at the non-Jonathan Taylor, Jahmyr Gibbs, Bijan Robinson type running backs that succeed as rookies, a lot of times it's the second half of the year when they get a pathway to usage. So I agree with you. I think I'm still on those running backs, but want to pick your brain specifically on one rookie running back who's actually shined. And it's one where we podcast together talking about prospects before the NFL draft.
Yeah.
And one guy that people were high on, and myself included, was Braylon Allen. Then he lands in absolutely the worst possible landing spot on paper behind Breece Hall, who everybody has in their top 3 dynasty running backs. But Braylon Allen, I think this is not a random week. I think this is the Jets want a little bit of a thunder and lightning approach, whether it's a Aaron Jones, AJ Dillon, whether it's a David Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs, whatever you want to call it. I think it's a Braylon Allen's going to get like 10 touches a game and it protects Breece Hall. What are your initial reactions to seeing Braylon Allen have his big breakout game? Do you think this is something that was a one-off, or do you think that Braylon Allen's just flat out good at football and dynasty managers should be looking to acquire him?
I think he's definitely good at football. I think the reason I didn't specifically say his name is because I think that week 2 game makes it much more difficult to acquire him for a reasonable cost. But I think he's absolutely good at football. I think he could have flex appeal with Breece Hall healthy, and he has league winning appeal if something happens to Breece Hall. I don't love it for Breece Hall. But no, I believe what I've seen from Braylon Allen. I hated the landing spot. It's a little more usage than I was expecting, and the touchdowns are a little bit random themselves. But no, outstanding and probably towards the top of that list. It's just that his cost now, I mean, it might cost more to acquire him today than it does Trey Benson.
Yeah, that's actually a great point. And I think that Braylon Allen, it's absolutely a guy where people weren't having to use that second round pick on. But now he absolutely cost you a second rounder. The thing about Braylon Allen that's so interesting and such a kind of a pain in the butt for Breece Hall managers moving forward is the guy's 20 years old. he's 20 years old, and he's like this huge, big, physical running back. It makes Breece Hall, it's kind of a double-edged sword here, because the whole argument for Breece Hall is incredible receiver, David Johnson-like receiver, but it does cap his ability to give you that massive rushing touchdown season on top of a huge reception season. So it sort of lowers his chances of giving you like a peak Christian McCaffrey like year. Very, very interesting to see if this is going to affect Breece Hall's startup cost like next year. You're still happy to have him right now, but man, think about being a Breece Hall manager last week. Maybe just one of those 2 touchdowns goes to him. And they targeted Braylon Allen 4 times too, which Heath, nobody was sitting here. I mean, that was one of the big knocks on him is, can he catch passes at the NFL level?
Yeah, and I actually thought that he could. I just thought landing with Breece Hall, there's no way he'd get a chance to. So yeah, I don't have to imagine being a Breece Hall manager. I was. It's not super fun, but it's going to be great. He still, I think, belongs in that top 3. My expectation is that he's still going to perform in a way that keeps his cost the same. I think the thing that people might miss is that you're right. At the beginning of the season, I said there's 2 guys that could legitimately have a peak CMC season. It's Breece and it's Bijan. And I'm not sure that possibility still exists for Breece.
There you go. Let's talk about the rookie wide receivers. Malik Nabers, mind-blowing stats from last week. He had the highest target share in like 9 years, and he had the most targets for a New York Giant since Odell in 2016. It's happening. Right. It's happening rapidly. Sort of your initial takeaways on him, and also your initial takeaways on Marvin Harrison Jr., where was there a better feeling for Marvin Harrison Jr. Dynasty managers than week 2? I mean, it was like a weight off of your shoulders.
And I think that's the thing is, like, this patient Heath is going to show up now. I probably need to see Marvin Harrison and Malik Nabers one more week, just because we had the terrible, they're both awesome. They're both of my top 6 Dynasty wide receivers. I'm not downplaying them, but in terms of thinking about what's going to happen this year, and specifically for Nabers, like, is this whole idea of Daniel Jones doesn't matter, he's incredible anyway, is that true against anybody other than Washington? Because that is the free space in terms of playing wide receivers and quarterbacks this year. They're going to give up 1 million yards receiving. So Malik Nabers gets the Browns this week. Obviously a very good defense. Let's see how Daniel Jones and Malik Nabers look then. And then if he does anything, like, he's not going to do what he did last week, but if he puts up a 100-yard game or 70 and a touchdown or something against the Browns, then I think you could legitimately start making the case that Malik Nabers should be in the top 3 in terms of dynasty wide receiver rankings. And the same thing for Harrison. Gibbs brought this up on Tuesday as well. I wish Harrison's route tree was a little bit more diverse. He is being targeted downfield a lot, which lends itself towards the low week 1 total and the monstrous week 2 total. But I still, like, he's my wide receiver 5, so I don't have any doubts.
I think that the usage, the Buffalo game was weird because it was sort of like they were running the ball so effectively in the first half. And then the Rams game was also weird because they basically were able to reel it in and take the foot off the gas because they were beating them so badly. This is going to be a really tilting week. Arizona, Detroit. I think this is going to be, like you said, one we really would need to pay attention to for Marvin Harrison. Interested to see how they use him. Nabers, I think you bring up a great point that it was Washington. There's this incredible like run of like 14 out of 15 weeks or 13 out of 15 weeks where a wide receiver's had a wide receiver 1 production or near wide receiver 1 production. It's just amazing how bad Washington is against opposing number 1
in multiple weeks. There's been multiple wide receiver 1s. Like, it's not like they get 2 top 12 wide receivers in the same week sometimes.
It's absolutely crazy. Malik Nabers, though, I do think that's sort of where the market's at. I had a trade right before the season where I traded Garrett Wilson for Nabers in a third. Right now, Wilson in a third doesn't get me Nabers.
No.
I wonder where you're at on this one. This is not on the show sheet. This is just a heat check. Jamar Chase manager. Let's say if you have Jamar Chase and you get in your inbox Malik Nabers for Jamar Chase straight up, Where are you at? Can you pull the trigger on it?
I have seen people this week already ranking Malik Nabers ahead of Jamar Chase in Dynasty.
Yep.
And that's where Heath's pumping the brakes just a little bit. That's where I'm like, I still have Jamar Chase as my wide receiver 3. I would still need something pretty, like, I'm not even sure that I would do Nabers in a third for Chase.
There you go. All right, Jax Falcone, Scott Bullinger over at the Undroppables,
Yes.
where you can listen to it right here on the Player Profiler podcast feed. He's there. He's Nabers ahead of him. I'd like to get a little bit more. I tried to trade a Jamar Chase for Nabers, and I asked for something significant on top. The guy basically hung up the phone, essentially.
Right.
But it takes one more spike week from Nabers, and Heath.
The beautiful thing about this is that Chase gets Washington this week.
I was going to say perfect storm. And it's a real issue for Cincinnati if Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase don't come out with significantly good games against this defense. And it's Monday Night Football, too. This is going to be all eyes on Cincinnati. So,
yes,
really, really, really fun week. Nico Collins, we both have him as a wide receiver 1 right now. I don't think the market necessarily is there yet, despite him crushing in prime time yet again. All of the underlying metrics are so strong. Targets per route run was sort of the argument that Nico Collins is great at football for all the analytical people this past offseason. And his targets per route run is significantly higher this year than it was last year. The guy is physically imposing. That was about as impressive a touchdown in terms of physicality as you're going to see from any wide receiver in the league in the previous game against Chicago. Sort of where are you at with Nico Collins?
I will admit, I just got him into my top 12 this week. So I think I had him at 15 last week. He's at 11 this week. So he is still climbing. And one of the problems I had with him, and this comes back to my, like, the 2 hats that I wear. Yes, I do dynasty rankings and trade charts and a dynasty podcast. I also do weekly projections. And the problem with weekly projections is you're always looking through it with this lens of, yes, that number's great, but nobody in the history of football has ever been able to maintain that. So where is he going to regress to? And Nico's still in that territory. You said it. His numbers last year were spectacular, but also it was a pretty low target volume and didn't seem particularly sustainable. Well, then through 2 games, he's actually more efficient across the board. Just Stephon Diggs shows up and Nico Collins is just even better at everything. So I'm slowly coming around. I do have him 1 spot behind Puka still. It's possible in a month that Nico Collins is a top 7 dynasty wide receiver for me. I'm trying to slow play it a little bit. I still think Tank Dell's going to be a big part of this offense and have a big role. And at some point, those numbers probably get a little bit closer together for Collins and Dell. But Collins has convinced me he's a top 12 dynasty wide receiver. That's for sure.
Yeah, and we've been high on Tank Dell kind of collectively every time we pod together. He's not going to be a sub 20% target share guy.
No.
He's going to have a week. And the whole narrative with him, potentially that could have been a touchdown that went through his hands the other night. So, yeah, we'll hang on to Tank Dell. Look to buy some Tank Dell if you can. Let's go ahead and rank them. Let's go wide receiver. Why don't you give your wide receiver 1, then I'll give my wide receiver 1 and 2 and so on, and we'll go back and forth. Make it easy for people to kind of be able to pay attention to this. So you start us out.
Justin Jefferson.
Jefferson for me as well.
CeeDee Lamb.
CeeDee Lamb for me as well.
Jamar Chase.
I'm Chase as well.
Amon-Ra St. Brown.
So I'm jumping Malik Nabers up to wide receiver 4.
Okay.
I had him at the beginning of the season a few spots below, but I'm there.
I get that. And I think like the Jameson Williams thing could make people maybe drop St. Brown just a little bit as well. Marvin Harrison's my number 5.
I have Harrison at number 5 as well. And then I'll just jump you. I have Amon-Ra St. Brown at wide receiver 6. So
and I have Nabers at 6.
So we're lockstep on the top 6. The difference is the Nabers and Amon-Ra St. Brown ranking. Here's where it gets a little bit more interesting. Who do you have at wide receiver 7?
AJ Brown.
So I'm still Garrett Wilson here because of the exceptional amount to the age difference, the health, and we've seen it now for 2 straight seasons. This one could kind of get me in trouble a little bit, but I'm going to stay digging my heels in with Garrett Wilson.
I've wondered this, and I just want to ask you a question, because with this third year wide receiver class, Wilson, London, thank goodness Saquon Barkley dropped that pass so Drake London could score a touchdown on Monday night, or the narrative on London would be terrible. London, Wilson, and George Pickens. Like, how many weeks do we have to get into the season before we start to think maybe they're not going to make the third year leap that we're all projecting them to make for the second year in a row?
I think we're there. I think that there's a lot of pressure on Chris Olave. The target share is there. He had 35% target share, but you're seeing the spike weeks with Shaheed, and they're very similar in production. If we look collectively over the years, way more closer than the dynasty market reflects. London, gosh, that was a tilting one. There was people deleting tweets on that touchdown catch. I'll tell you that Heath. It's that was a tilting one for sure. And I love that you brought up like the sliding doors with Saquon drops it. Oh my gosh. For me, this class might just be a bunch of strong wide receiver twos. And I think that's fine. The problem with this class is they're the guys that we're not going to have in our top 12 in this rookie class that could break like the glass ceiling, like guys like Xavier Worthy, guys like Roma Dunze, guys like Brian Thomas. During the second half of the season, I'm fully convinced that some of those guys are going to be not necessarily wide receiver ones, but guys you would consider pivoting off of those year 3 guys too. So tilting year for those guys. Where I dropped Wilson as wide receiver 7. Let's get back to you. Yeah. You're wide receiver 7.
Well, I got AJ Brown at 7.
Oh, excuse me,
had Wilson.
Yeah.
I've got Wilson at 8.
Okay, and then I've got at 8. I moved up Nico Collins, so I have him at wide receiver 8. Very reactionary on my part, but he's healthy. AJ's not, so he's wide receiver 8 for me.
And my wide receiver 9 is Tyreek Hill still.
AJ Brown for me at wide receiver 9.
10 for me is Puka.
So 10 for me is Rashee Rice.
Okay. I've got him at 13, so just outside of my top 12, but I love it.
Yeah, I'm going to be aggressive on him, and I actually think that he's going to be the big beneficiary from the running back injury, where I think you'll see a little bit more manufactured looks on Rice. I think a lot more targets on like their first half, first quarter type possessions. I think they're going to really look to establish Rice. He's already kind of usurped Travis Kelce as the first down guy there and the receiver we want to lean on. Yeah. So I'm on Rice.
So I had Nico at 11.
Okay. And I'll say for me, Tyreek's at 11, even with the Skylar Thompson stuff.
And then Chris Olave rounds out my top 12.
Yeah, and for me, I really want to push Olave ahead of Puka Nacua, but I just can't do it. I think I'm going to go Puka at wide receiver 12 based on what we saw last year. But if somebody sent me an offer, Olave straight up for Puka right now with the injury discount, I think I'm taking it begrudgingly. Want to pivot over here to tight ends. Kyle Pitts. I'm nervous on this one. Kyle Pitts was one before the year where we probably would have both had him very highly in our rankings. Through the first 2 weeks of the year, he had that touchdown in week 1, but it was sort of a busted coverage. This is ugly stuff. We're talking about 12% air yard share. We're talking about a lot of the metrics are just not supporting Kyle Pitts being like an impactful guy for us this year. Where are you at on him? Do you still have hope? Are you already adjusting your expectations for the season?
It's such a weird thing at this position, because who that I had ranked behind him has given me any reason to have more, like the guys that I had kind of 3 guys tied at the hip back in August, and it was Brock Bowers, Kyle Pitts, Dalton Kincaid. Well, Brock Bowers left those guys in the dust, but do I feel better about Dalton Kincaid than I do about Kyle Pitts? Not at all. And so I haven't downgraded Pitts. He's just kind of sitting there, even though I don't feel good about him.
I think you nailed it. I think it comes down to it, like you brought up a George Kittle, where you sort of know what you're going to get, but the window's so small. It's sort of an anti-dynasty theory to trade a player who's Kyle Pitts' age for a guy George Kittle's age. But it comes down to it where Kittle, I might have a 2-year window where the guy's giving me exceptional production, whereas Pitts is sort of waiting around. But you did make a great point that all these guys sort of like, I'm not even going to make you rank 12 because 12 is so weird right now, Heath. I think we just do 6, and then I have a 1 or 2 questions for you. But it's all of those guys, Ferguson, Engram, and Njoku, they're all hurt. the biggest winner at the tight end position this year is TJ Hawkinson, who's been hurt, but you know that he's really good, and you know that he gives you top five production multiple seasons. And we've seen Sam Darnold look better than expected. So for me, like TJ Hawkinson, if you could trade for a hurt TJ Hawkinson, and maybe the manager's like a little worried about holding him for like 3 more weeks before he comes back, that's the guy I want to go out and get. Like, obviously Bowers is unbelievable and probably he's my tight end one right now in Dynasty, but you're right. It's just been sort of like a lost cause. Isaiah Likely week 1. I think Isaiah Likely, I'll go one question for you. Is Isaiah Likely a top 12 tight end for you in Dynasty?
He is not currently a top 12 tight end for me. He probably would have been with just anything resembling a good follow-up to week 1. It's too easy for me. And the Ravens kind of indicated that they didn't expect for Isaiah Likely to have that big of a role. They were just shocked by what the Chiefs did to make sure Mark Andrews didn't have an impact on the game. And so that was kind of their counter move. At this point, I don't think Mark Andrews is going away at all. And I still have a hard time buying into the tight end 2 in his own offense. I don't know how long it's going to be before Likely's the tight end 1 in his own offense.
I think that's interesting. For me, I do put Isaiah Likely in the top 12. I put him right around whenever I'm doing a tight end ranking. He comes in like 11 or 12 because we've seen multiple spike weeks with him over the course of 2 seasons. So we've seen his ability to impact the game. And when I look at some of the younger tight ends that he's competing with, guys like Pat Freiermuth, guys like Ben Sinnott, guys like Michael Mayer, Tucker Kraft, it's guys we're just like only rank them because of their age, and we're not really seeing the production. So for me, I'm there. But let's not beat around the bush here. Let's start out with, we'll go back and forth here. Let's just do top 6 because we don't want it to get gross and confusing for people.
I'm still sticking with Trey McBride as my tight end 1.
Yeah, I love Trey McBride. I actually traded for him last weekend in Dynasty League. I love him. He's actually my tight end 2.
Okay.
I'm going Brock Bowers at 1. I've seen enough. I'm there. Brock Bowers, tight end 1. He's a big Jordy Nelson playing tight end.
He's my tight end 2. So like we've got the same top 2, no question there. I think I can just jump to number 3, which is still Sam Laporta, though I've been concerned by the start of his season as well.
Yeah, I'm Laporta as well. It's not what you want to see at all. There was a JJ Zachariason had a stat on he's actually running more routes, but we haven't seen the targets. This feels like it could be a Laporta squeaky wheel week, just like we saw with Amon-Ra St. Brown last week. We just need to see Laporta catch a touchdown and we'll feel good. But he gets like the guy could have a poor season. We're still going to have to rank him because of the tight end 1 overall year last year. He's good. Jameson Williams, though, hurting him. That's definitely Jameson Williams' impact on that one. How about tight end 4 for you, Heath?
We should have just done 3.
We should have just done 3 is right.
I'm still holding on to hope with Mark Andrews. It's only been 2 weeks.
And I'm going to still be the same hope holding with Dalton Kincaid because of the age, because of the attachment to Josh Allen, and because I've seen it last year. So I don't think this is going to be like a lost season for him. I think we'll start seeing some impactful weeks, but certainly he's more in like the deluge of guys in this range than a guy who could challenge the Bowers, the McBride, Laporta, big 3. It's probably 4 might even be too aggressive on him, but I'll begrudgingly I've dug my heels in deep enough here. I'm still Kincaid.
I basically have 5 and 6 still tied at the hip, Kyle Pitts and Dalton Kincaid.
Okay, and for me, I'm going to go TJ Hawkinson at tight end 5. And then after that, it's just a complete cluster. I'll take Mark Andrews, though, at tight end 6, but I am a little worried on Mark Andrews. 29 years old usually doesn't scare you on a tight end, but the guy has dealt with injuries, and I want to see it. I really want to see it. This is a really tilting week. You got 2 teams coming off a loss, potential for offensive fireworks, and it could be a big Mark Andrews week. We'll see. Also a tilting week for Derrick Henry managers too. Back-to-back weeks getting outsnapped by Justice Hill, not what you want to see with that sort of draft capital. Let's take it to the running back position. We'll kind of close out with this one. This is a really, really fun one. First off, I want to hear your thoughts on, before we rank them, Skylar Thompson taking over behind center. What does this do with Devon Achane? You talked about how Tyreek Hill is going to be affected by this. But could this be a positive for Achane where he's even more used, maybe more manufactured interesting looks? Skylar Thompson, a check down type quarterback. Your thoughts on Achane, his start to the season, and your expectations with the quarterback downgrade?
I think that's exactly right. He's been so much better in the passing game than he has in the running game early this year. And Skylar Thompson has thrown more than a fourth of his passes to running backs when he's been a starting quarterback in the NFL. I think we see the Achane target percentage increase. He's more of a number 3 wide receiver than anything else. And he is to the moon. The only question is and it was the question when he came into the league, can a guy his size handle 20 plus touches per game? And we're about to find out, it seems like.
Yeah. And in running back's another position where a lot of the guys just sort of haven't helped themselves. And one of the ones that did help themselves got hurt. Kenneth Walker could have been a one where if he played 2 weeks, he could have risen up here in the rankings. So I do think this is another position where let's do a top 6. And then if we could do, if you want to do a top 12, we could do a top 12. I just feel like right now there's a lot of confusion. You know what? Let's do the top 12.
Okay.
Let's go running back 1 for you, Heath.
Bijan Robinson.
Bijan for me, and maybe a tier break after him.
It's beginning to look that way with the Braylon Allen involvement. I'll take Breece still at number 2.
Yeah, and I'm going to take Breece as well at 2, but I think it's getting a little bit closer for me with maybe 1 or 2 guys behind him.
I'll take Gibbs at 3.
And I'm actually going to go Devon Achane up to 3. I love Gibbs. Gibbs is my guy, but I mean, Devon Achane just looks like he could be the running back 1 this year. And in terms of age, you're looking at exactly the same age.
I've got Achane right behind him at 4.
And I'm going to go Gibbs at 4.
I was really happy to see Jonathan Taylor actually catch a couple of passes last week. Jonathan Taylor's my RB5.
Yeah, and I'm there. I think I was way too low on JT this summer. Anybody who watches my podcast, one of my takes was Travis Etienne is going to outscore Jonathan Taylor. That was a bad call. Jonathan Taylor, contract installation, role installation, and he's just good at football, and he's only 25 years old.
I don't know what to say about RB6, but I've still got Christian McCaffrey because I think he might come back and win you a league this year.
I'm going Saquon Barkley at RB6. I'm worried, way more worried, I think, than you are about CMC. Yeah. I could see this being a situation where if they win some games, maybe they don't have home field advantage with or without McCaffrey, and they slow play him for the actual NFL playoffs, and then maybe get one more run out of him next year. I could see that scenario too. I think he's banged up.
I'm going ETN at 7.
And I think you have to stay with ETN at 7. It's a terrible start to the year, but it's just really a testament to the guys behind him and what we've seen from him last year.
I think this is my outlier at 8, and it felt really good last week. James Cook at 8.
Man, and I'll give you a hat tip. You were all over James Cook this past summer, and I had a bunch of James Cook Dynasty shares you made me feel a lot better on, Heath. And hey, through 2 weeks, the guy's getting runs inside the 10-yard line, scoring touchdowns, incredible stuff. For me, I'm actually going to, in this ranking, I think I'm going to actually push Ken Walker up there because I think this coaching staff views him as this exceptional bell cow. And when he comes back, I think it's going to be a very, very strong end of the season. Really positive stuff in week 1. I think this coaching staff also just gets it offensively.
I think you're exactly right about Ken Walker, who's my RB11. If he had stayed healthy, by now he might be up to that point for me as well. He's had some injury concerns in the past, and that makes me worried about projecting the bell cow role onto him, but he's certainly exciting. My RB9, Kyron Williams.
And for me, my RB9 is James Cook.
10 for me is Jonathan Brooks. Just a couple more weeks.
Oh, man, I love that one. For me, Kyron is my RB10.
I've got Walker at 11.
And at 11 for me, I have Jonathan Brooks. I think that the switch over to Andy Dalton is actually a massive win for Brooks.
Huge, competent NFL offense, maybe even. And then I've got Barkley at 12. He's the guy I was too low on coming into the season. I'm slowly moving him back up. Although I think maybe the touchdowns in week 1 might have been a show off the new toy thing. We're still getting tush-push touchdowns for Jalen Hurts.
And for me, this one's going to make people kind of angry, and including maybe Matt Kelly and Billy Muzio and a lot of people at Player Profiler, but Christian McCaffrey falls all the way to 12 for me. I just think we've seen it with McCaffrey before, where there's 2 seasons before he got to San Francisco where missed a bunch of games with injuries. This feels like that. And the fact that he's this old, I always think back to Austin Eckler, how quick the fall was. McCaffrey's a different level of player, but Austin Eckler, Heath, if we would have had this conversation 18 months ago versus today, father time versus running backs, always an interesting one. And let's squeeze in a quarterback ranking. How far do you want to go on this one? You want to do a full top 12?
I got whatever you need.
Okay, so let's do a full top 12 QB rankings right now for Dynasty. Go for it. You can start us out at the top.
I will qualify this by saying CBS is one of the few sites that's 6 points per pass touchdown. So my rankings are 6 points per pass touchdown. So keep that in mind with the rankings. Patrick Mahomes still my QB1.
Yeah, and for me, I think because of the quality of the weapons and because of the change in the Buffalo offense that we've seen this year, I think it's Mahomes number 1 for me. I would have wanted to have Allen there at 1, but it's Mahomes.
I'll go Allen 2.
Allen 2 for me as well.
Jalen 3.
Jalen 3 for me as well.
Lamar 4.
So I'm going CJ Stroud at 4. Just love CJ Stroud and love the weapons that they've added for him.
I've got Stroud at 5.
Lamar for me at 5.
Burrow at 6, but he's hanging by a thread.
And despite the Green Bay game last week, I think I'm going to still put Anthony Richardson here, but this is probably incorrect. I probably should adjust this one. I think he'll bounce back this week. I love what I saw in week 1 in terms of being able to push the ball downfield and also being able to run the ball. And I think Josh Downs is going to help them, Heath, when he comes back.
Yes. I've got Richardson at 7, despite the Green game, but that's the asterisk, despite the Green Bay game.
And I'm going to push Jaden Daniels up. I've seen everything that I need from Jaden Daniels in terms of his rushing ability, and I think it's time to move him up the rankings. I think that one thing that I would do, Heath, is if you have drafted Caleb Williams over Jaden Daniels, might be time to maybe kick the tires and see if that manager who took Daniels behind Caleb wouldn't want to redo.
It's a good point. I'll go Kyler at 8.
And I think you're right. You're spot on with that one. I'll do Kyler at 8 as well.
Caleb at 9.
I guess this is probably about where I should put him. And also Joe Burrow, I have a little bit more concerns than you do.
Right.
We had the Love injury. I think you have to put Caleb Williams here. So I'll agree with you on that one.
And I have Daniels at 10.
And I'll go Burrow at 10. You really can't jump him with all these guys.
Herbert for me at 11.
And I'm actually going to push Dak Prescott up to 11 over Herbert because I just don't like I just think that the volume in LA, despite Herbert being really, really good, it doesn't seem like the Harbaugh offense is going to support high-end quarterback production.
And I've got Purdy at 12.
And I will go Herbert at 12. So this was really, really fun today, Heath. Always great to drop our rankings this early on in the year. I wonder how different these would look in like week 8. Let everybody know once again where they can find your work, what you've got coming out, and sort of your weekly schedule, Heath.
Oh wow, yeah. The
stuff
weekly...
the stuff you want the player profiler viewers and listeners, because you don't have to give the full scope, but a couple of things you'd love for them to check out.
Well, I think most importantly, especially for Dynasty, is on Tuesdays we have FFT Dynasty 11:30 a.m. Eastern on YouTube on the FFT YouTube channel. You can find it wherever you find podcasts. A little bit later in the week, I update all of my rankings Dynasty-wise weekly on Wednesday, and then generally on Thursday, I'll write Dynasty rankings, risers, and fallers. If you go over to Sportsline on Wednesday, you can find my Dynasty trade charts, a trade chart for both 1 QB leagues and for Superflex leagues. And just a point I like to make whenever I pump those is that a lot of trade charts you see out there are like, this is what the industry says, or this is what everybody's trades say. You should use those. I like to use those alongside my own, which is this is what Heath says. So you might be able to find a place where, oh, Heath likes James Cook a lot more than this trade chart says. Let's go trade for James Cook.
They should have listened to you this summer on James Cook, Heath, and they should have traded for him anyway. So highly recommend your trade chart. It's actually a very useful tool. You can kind of price check and see which way you think you're going to not be offensive to your opposing manager as well. and it's a really, really good tool. Highly recommend all of Heath's podcasts. If you enjoyed this video on YouTube, give it a like, and make sure you're subscribed to Dynasty Life anywhere you get your podcasts. We'll be back soon.
Hey, I want to thank you for being part of this broadcast. If you have any thoughts on it, leave a comment. If you enjoyed it, make sure you leave a like. And if you want to see more shows on the Player Profiler channel, subscribe to it. That's how we know you want more.